The first time I realized something was seriously wrong was when a county inspector knocked on my door and asked how many houses I'd built behind my garage, because according to their system, my single-family home was now the registered address for 6 brand-new residences. I laughed at first because it sounded like a joke, the kind where you wait for the punchline. The inspector didn't laugh back. He just tilted his tablet toward me and said, very calmly, "Sir, your address is currently being used to pull permits, utilities, and occupancy certificates for properties that don't exist. I've lived at this address for 9 years. 1 house, 1 mailbox, 1 driveway, 1 very normal life. No hidden cul-de-sac. No secret subdivision tucked behind my fence. Just me, my garage, and a patch of land the HOA had been mad about since the day I moved in." So when I heard the words new homes and my address in the same sentence, my stomach dropped in a way laughter couldn't cover. The inspector asked if he could step inside. His badge was real, his tone was neutral, and his presence immediately made this feel bigger than neighborhood drama. As he walked through my living room, he scrolled through records that showed site plans, permit filings, utility hookups, even preliminary tax assessments. All tied to my street number. Not a variation. Not a typo. My exact address, repeated over and over, like someone had copied and pasted it into places it never belonged. I asked who submitted the paperwork. He didn't answer right away. He just stopped scrolling, looked up, and said a name I already knew too well. Karen. She was the head of the HOA. Self-appointed, self-important, and deeply convinced that rules only applied when she was the one enforcing them. 4 years, she'd treated the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. She measured grass with a ruler. She photographed trash cans. She once tried to find me because my porch light was the wrong shade of warm. But this was different. This wasn't petty. This was institutional. The inspector explained that several new homes had been registered under a development expansion request filed by the HOA. On paper, the HOA had subdivided a section of common land, assigned lot numbers, and registered temporary addresses for permitting. Instead of creating new addresses, someone had reused mine. Over and over. Utilities, mail routing, even emergency services were now linked to my house for properties that technically existed only in databases. I felt something shift from confusion to anger. Not loud anger. The quiet kind that tightens your jaw and makes you suddenly aware of how much trouble someone else has decided to drop into your lap. I told him I had never authorized anything. He nodded. He said that part was already obvious. What wasn't obvious was intent. He explained that misusing an existing address simplified approval workflows. It avoided triggering new address verification. It let things move faster, especially if the address belonged to someone who wasn't likely to notice until much later. Karen noticed everything. She just assumed I wouldn't notice this. After the inspector left, I stood in my driveway staring at my mailbox like it had personally betrayed me. That was when I saw it. A stack of mail jammed inside, thicker than usual. Utility notices. Preliminary tax document. A welcome packet from the county addressed to new occupants. All with my address. Different unit numbers scribbled in small print, like an afterthought. I didn't even go inside. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. Karen answered on the 3rd ring, already sounding annoyed. I told her the county had just been at my house. There was a pause, the kind where someone is deciding how much to lie. Then she laughed lightly and said it was probably just a clerical thing. A temporary placeholder. Nothing for me to worry about. That was when I knew she'd done it on purpose. I asked why my address was being used. She said it was common practice. I asked who approved it. She said the board had authority. I asked if she'd informed me. She said she didn't need to. Each answer stacked on the last until her confidence became almost impressive. She spoke like someone who believed paperwork itself bent around her. I told her to fix it immediately. She told me not to be dramatic. She reminded me that the HOA existed to protect property values. She implied that if I made trouble, I'd be the one hurting the neighborhood. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear. From clarity. Karen hadn't just crossed a line. She'd erased it and redrawn it somewhere more convenient. Over the next 2 days, the situation escalated without me doing anything at all. Delivery trucks showed up asking for unit numbers. A utility crew tried to mark my lawn for underground lines I hadn't requested. A confused real estate agent knocked, holding glossy flyers advertising exciting new homes in a place that was literally my front yard. I started documenting everything: photos, videos, timestamp. I forwarded copies to the county inspector, who replied with a single sentence that made my pulse spike. This is now an audit. Audits are not gentle. They don't care about intentions or excuses. They care about patterns, and Karen had left one behind like a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to her desk. The HOA sent out a neighborhood email that evening, blaming address discrepancies on county delays and asking residents to be patient. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. I could feel it in the way neighbors looked at my house as they drove past, like it had suddenly become a problem zone. Karen showed up the next morning, unannounced, clipboard in hand. She stood at the edge of my driveway like she owned it and told me the board expected my cooperation. She said I was being difficult. She said I was holding up progress. She said the county would sort it out eventually, and until then, it was best not to overreact. I asked her, calmly, if she'd used my address to avoid regulatory review. Her smile froze for half a second. Just long enough. That was all I needed. By the end of the week, county vehicles were parked up and down the street. Inspectors interviewed neighbors. Records were pulled. Filings were compared. And somewhere inside a very official building, someone noticed that one HOA president had gotten a little too comfortable using someone else's identity to build a paper neighborhood that didn't exist. Karen thought this was about convenience, about speed, about power. She didn't realize she'd turned my house into the epicenter of a county investigation. And this was only the beginning. By Monday morning, my house had stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like evidence. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No delivery trucks. No utility vans. No confused strangers clutching clipboards. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't relax you, because you know it's temporary. The calm before paperwork hits the fan. Then my phone rang. It was the county inspector again. Same calm voice, same professional distance, but this time there was an edge underneath it. He told me the audit had officially expanded. What started as a discrepancy had turned into a pattern. Multiple filings, reused documentation, identical signatures across different permit applications, all traced back to the HOA's development committee, which, conveniently, was just Karen and 2 people who never disagreed with her. He asked if I'd noticed anything else unusual over the past year. Not just recently. Anything. I almost laughed. Once I started talking, it all came spilling out. The sudden survey stakes that appeared and disappeared. The routine inspections, no one could explain. The way Karen had insisted certain parcels were common property, even when the maps said otherwise. At the time, it had felt like harassment. Now it sounded like groundwork. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said something that made my chest tighten. Sir, it appears your address wasn't misused once. It was used as a shield. Apparently, by anchoring multiple filings to an existing, occupied address, Karen had reduced scrutiny on everything else. Inspectors assumed someone lived there. Utilities assumed service continuity. Emergency routing assumed access. The system trusted the address because it trusted me. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table staring at the wood grain like it might rearrange itself into an explanation. I hadn't just been inconvenienced. I'd been used as infrastructure. The HOA email that afternoon tried to control the narrative. Karen wrote it herself. You could tell by the tone. Overly polished. Passive-aggressive reassurance wrapped in corporate language. She claimed the county was overreacting to a clerical shortcut. She emphasized that no harm had been done. She asked residents to avoid speculation and direct all questions to the board. She did not ask anyone to stop contacting me. Neighbors started knocking again, but now they weren't confused. They were curious. Some were nervous. One couple asked if their property taxes were going to change. Another wanted to know if emergency services would still find their house if something happened. I answered what I could and told them the truth when I couldn't. Karen watched from across the street. She stood by her SUV pretending to scroll on her phone, but every time someone left my driveway, her head lifted just a little. Her posture was stiff, controlled. The way people look when they're trying to project authority while something slips out of reach. That evening, I received a certified letter. Not from the county. From the HOA. Inside was a formal notice accusing me of obstructing community development. It claimed my refusal to temporarily host administrative addressing had delayed progress and caused reputational harm. They demanded cooperation. They cited bylaws I knew didn't apply. They ended with a warning about potential fines. I laughed out loud, alone in my living room. Not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. Karen still thought this was a fight she could win with paper. The next day, the county sent their own letter. Much thicker. Much quieter. It informed me that my address had been placed under protective review. Any filings using it would now be flagged. Any new submissions would trigger manual verification. They thanked me for my cooperation and asked me to continue documenting all contact with the HOA. They didn't mention Karen by name. They didn't need to. The pressure started showing cracks. HOA meetings were suddenly postponed. Karen stopped answering calls. The board's website went offline for maintenance. I overheard two neighbors arguing about whether the expansion had ever been legal in the first place. People started asking questions Karen wasn't around to answer. Then she showed up at my door again. This time, no clipboard. No smile. She stood too close, invading space like proximity could reassert control. She said the county was misunderstanding things. She said audits happened all the time. She said if I cared about the neighborhood, I'd make a statement supporting the HOA. I asked her why she'd never created new addresses. She said the county made it difficult. I asked why she used mine. She said it was efficient. I asked if she realized falsifying address data was a felony. That was when she snapped. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Her face tightened, and her voice dropped into something sharp and resentful. She said I was overstepping. She said I didn't understand how development worked. She said people like me were always holding progress hostage. People like me. I told her to leave my property. She hesitated, then stepped back, her confidence leaking out in small, involuntary movements. She tried one last angle, softer this time. She said we could fix this quietly. Adjust records. Smooth things over. Make it go away. I told her the county already had everything. That night, county vehicles returned. Not inspectors this time. Records officers. IT staff. They set up temporary workstations in a neighbor's garage and began pulling digital histories. Every submission. Every login. Every revision timestamp. The audit had teeth now. Karen didn't send another email. Instead, a rumor started circulating that the HOA expansion was being frozen indefinitely. That funding was being reviewed. That someone at the county had asked why addresses were being reused across unrelated filings. I sat on my porch watching the street lights flicker on, realizing something important. Karen had built her authority on the assumption that no one would ever check. She had never planned for someone to stand still long enough for the system to catch up. And as the county's spotlight widened, I knew this wasn't just about my address anymore. It was about everything she'd touched. The first sign was the locks. One morning, I walked past the HOA office on my way out and noticed the door had a brand new keypad installed, the kind meant to keep people out, not welcome them in. The posted hours were gone. The bulletin board was empty. Even the fake potted plant Karen used to reposition like a territorial marker had vanished. Authority doesn't disappear loudly. It retreats. The county called me in that afternoon. Not to accuse me of anything. To clarify. They wanted timelines, screenshots, copies of emails, photos of notices taped to my door. They laid everything out on a long table like pieces of a puzzle they already understood but needed legally aligned. One of the auditors, a woman with a voice so calm it felt surgical, asked me if I'd ever given the HOA written permission to use my address for anything. I told her no. She nodded and slid a document toward me. It was an internal HOA memo. Karen's words. Karen's signature. A directive authorizing the temporary use of an existing resident address to expedite county approvals. No consent forms attached. No resident name listed. Just confidence dressed up as policy. They didn't ask me to comment. They didn't need to. What surprised me wasn't how sloppy it was. It was how long she'd been doing it. The audit timeline stretched back years. Minor filings at first. Landscaping permit. Storage approvals. Then bigger things. Utility routing. Environmental assessments. Finally, housing registrations. She hadn't jumped off a cliff. She'd walked down a staircase, one unchecked assumption at a time. The fallout started spreading sideways. Neighbors began receiving letters asking them to verify lot boundaries. A couple down the block found out their shed had been approved under the wrong parcel. Another neighbor learned their water line was tied to an expansion permit that no longer existed. Confusion breeds fear. Fear breeds anger. And anger needs a target. Karen tried to redirect it toward me. That night, she sent a mass email accusing a single resident of exaggerating a clerical issue into a county-wide problem. She framed herself as a victim of bureaucracy. She implied personal grudges. She used words like misunderstanding and cooperation and regrettable escalation. She didn't mention addresses. She didn't mention audits. She didn't mention that the county had frozen every HOA filing pending review. The replies were not kind. People started responding publicly, asking why their property was now under review, asking why the HOA hadn't informed them, asking why their tax statements didn't match last year. Karen replied once, defensively, then stopped. The next morning, a process server showed up at my door. Not for me. He asked if Karen still lived at her listed address. I told him yes. He nodded and moved on, like this was just another stop on a long list. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just administrative anymore. The county wasn't alone. Other departments had noticed. Utilities, emergency services, tax assessors. Once one system flags something, the others follow. Karen's trick had relied on the idea that no one ever talked to each other. They were talking now. She tried to confront me one last time. Caught me while I was taking out the trash like she'd planned it. No witnesses. No recording devices she could see. She looked exhausted. Not frantic. Controlled, but barely. She said the audit had gone too far. She said the county was digging into unrelated matters. She said I needed to call them off. I asked how I was supposed to do that. She said I was the reason they were here. I told her the truth, calmly, evenly. The county didn't care about me anymore. I was just the entry point. What they cared about was why an HOA president had been impersonating infrastructure. That word landed hard. She flinched. Just a little. Enough. She told me I was twisting things. She said everyone reused addresses. She said this was standard practice. She said the county would realize they'd overreacted and move on. I asked her why she'd never put her own address on the filings. She didn't answer. That afternoon, the county posted a public notice. A temporary suspension of all HOA development authority pending investigation. It wasn't dramatic. No names. No accusations. Just a sterile announcement that effectively stripped Karen of everything she'd built her identity around. She lost control quietly. The HOA board resigned one by one. Not publicly. Emails sent in the middle of the night. Short. Formal. Final. No one wanted their name on the letterhead anymore. Karen was alone. The last piece came when emergency services knocked on my door again. This time to verify access routes. They explained that several registered homes tied to my address had no physical access, no fire lanes, no emergency clearance. If something happened, responders would be sent to my driveway. That's when the county auditor said it out loud. This could have gotten someone killed. The room went silent. Karen hadn't just broken rules. She'd endangered lives. All for speed. All for control. All because she assumed systems existed to serve her, not protect people. As I left the building, I passed Karen in the hallway. No clipboard. No confidence. Just a woman staring at a wall like it might offer an escape route. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked cornered. And for the first time since this started, I realized the story was no longer about my address. It was about accountability. And Karen was running out of places to hide. Karen was no longer standing in the center of either one. The county's public notice had done something the HOA never could. It made people read. Neighbors who had ignored emails for years were suddenly pulling maps, digging through old documents, comparing notes over driveways and fences. What had once been background noise turned into whispered conversations that stopped when someone walked too close. I became an accidental reference point. People didn't ask me what was happening anymore. They asked me what had already happened, like they were trying to catch up to a story that had been moving without them. The county scheduled on-site verifications. Clipboards, measuring wheels, GPS unit. Real work, done slowly. They walked lots, checked easements, confirmed boundaries. They asked residents to point out fences, sheds, driveways, anything that didn't match official records. Every mismatch became another thread pulled loose. Karen tried to stay visible at first. She attended one inspection, standing off to the side, arms crossed, offering commentary no one requested. She corrected inspectors on procedures they'd been doing longer than she'd been running the HOA. She smiled tightly, like politeness was a shield. It didn't work. One inspector asked her to step back. Another asked her to stop interrupting. The third asked if she was acting in any official capacity. She said she was the HOA president. The inspector nodded and said, "Not today." That was the moment people noticed. Authority doesn't vanish all at once. It flickers. That flicker was enough. Karen stopped showing up after that. The next wave came from the tax office. Revised assessments. Notices of correction. Apologies printed in small, careful font. Some residents owed money. Others were owed refunds. Everyone was angry. The HOA's silence became louder than any explanation Karen had ever given. I received another visit from the county auditor. This time, she wasn't asking questions. She was updating me. The misuse of my address had triggered a deeper review of how the HOA handled filings altogether. Multiple addresses had been reused across unrelated permit. Mine was just the most visible. I asked what that meant. She said it meant the county was treating every HOA submission for the past 5 years as potentially unreliable. I thought of Karen's confidence. The way she'd waved off concerns like flies. The way she'd spoken about systems as obstacles instead of safeguard. Systems remember. Karen finally reached out again, but not directly. A lawyer sent a letter. It was careful, neutral, full of phrases like unintended consequences and mutual resolution. It suggested mediation. It suggested a joint statement. It suggested moving forward. It did not suggest admitting fault. I forwarded it to the county. The response was immediate and blunt. They were past mediation. The audit had entered the enforcement phase. That was when Karen's allies started disappearing. Contractors distanced themselves. Vendors stopped returning calls. The bank that had been financing the expansion froze the account pending clarification. The HOA's operating budget went into limbo. Karen had always believed power came from proximity, from being the loudest voice in the room. from acting first and explaining later. Now the rooms were empty. She showed up at my house one evening, just before sunset. Not angry. Not defensive. Tired. She asked if we could talk. I said we could talk on the porch. She sat, hands folded too tightly, and stared at the street like it might distract her from what she was about to say. She told me she never meant for it to get this big. She said everyone cut corners. She said she was trying to help the community grow. I asked her why she'd ignored consent. She said people complicated things. I asked her why she'd ignored safety. She said that was the county's job. I asked her why she'd never asked permission. She didn't answer. She finally said what she'd come to say. She wanted me to tell the county it was a misunderstanding. She wanted me to say she'd acted in good faith. She wanted me to help contain the damage. I told her the damage was already contained. It was just no longer containable by her. She stood up slowly, like gravity had increased. She told me I didn't understand what I'd started. She said the neighborhood would suffer. She said people would blame me. I told her people were already blaming the truth. The county's next move landed a week later. Formal notices of violation. Not fines yet. Findings. Documented, referenced, cross-checked. Karen's name appeared more than once. Not as president. As filer. The distinction mattered. The HOA board issued a statement disbanding itself temporarily. They cited legal uncertainty. They promised cooperation. They wished the community well. Karen's name was not on it. The final blow of the chapter came quietly. A fire marshal's report circulated among residents. It stated that several of the proposed homes, registered under my address, failed minimum access and safety requirements. If construction had proceeded, emergency response would have been compromised. Reading it made my hands shake. This hadn't just been about control, or shortcuts, or ego. It had been reckless, and as the county prepared the next phase, I realized something unsettling. Karen hadn't stopped because she was sorry. She'd stopped because she was out of moves, and the system she'd tried to outsmart was just getting started. She was fighting reality. The neighborhood had entered a strange limbo. Construction equipment never arrived. Survey flags stayed frozen in place like abandoned prop. The promised expansion existed only in old emails and glossy flyers no one wanted to look at anymore. What remained was uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of making people dig. Neighbors started comparing notes in earnest. Not gossip this time. Documents, screenshot, old notices pulled from drawers and inboxes. Someone set up a shared folder. Another neighbor mapped out discrepancies on a spreadsheet. What had once been passive compliance turned into collective curiosity. Patterns emerged. Permits approved before requests were submitted. Notices dated after decisions. Signatures that looked suspiciously identical across years. Karen's handwriting, confident and looping, appeared everywhere. The county called another meeting. This one wasn't informational. It was corrective. Officials explained how the audit had expanded beyond the HOA's expansion project. Utility misallocations, emergency service routing errors, tax boundary inconsistencies, each traced back to filings Karen had either submitted or approved. They didn't say her name often. They didn't need to. Every slide pointed to the same source. Someone asked if charges were coming. The official paused before answering. He said the county didn't speculate. He said findings were being referred to appropriate departments. He said misuse of address data carried serious implications, especially when it affected public safety. Karen didn't attend. Instead, she sent another letter through her lawyer. This one was more urgent. It asked me again to help clarify things. It suggested that my cooperation could expedite resolution. It implied that continued silence might worsen outcomes for everyone involved. I forwarded it again. This time, the county replied with a request. They wanted a sworn statement, a formal account of my interactions with Karen, the HOA, and the misuse of my address. They scheduled it for the following week. When I sat down to write it, I realized how much had happened that I'd brushed off at the time. The casual demands, the unexplained inspections, the way Karen had always spoken as if permission was optional. Laying it all out felt less like telling a story and more like documenting a slow-motion collision. Karen tried one last direct approach. She waited outside my house early one morning. No clipboard, no lawyer. Just her, leaning against her car like she belonged there. She said she felt betrayed. She said I'd gone behind her back. She said I should have come to her first. I reminded her that I had. She said she never thought I'd escalate it this far. I told her I never thought she'd use my address to register homes that didn't exist. That was the moment her composure cracked. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. She asked what the county was saying. She asked if they were blaming her personally. She asked if I thought this could ruin her. I told her the truth. The county wasn't asking me what I thought. They were asking what happened. She left without another word. The referrals became public a few days later. Not dramatic announcements. Just items added to an agenda. The county had forwarded findings to the district attorney's office for review. They had also notified state regulators overseeing HOAs and municipal filings. Karen's name appeared again. This time in the context of individual responsibility. The HOA's bank account was officially frozen. Payroll halted. Contracts voided. The expansion project was declared inactive. Years of momentum evaporated overnight. Neighbors reacted in waves. Some were relieved. Some were furious. A few were embarrassed that they'd trusted Karen for so long. One neighbor knocked on my door just to say thank you. Another accused me of ruining everything. I listened. I didn't argue. This wasn't personal anymore. The county scheduled depositions. Karen was listed. So was I. So were former board members who'd resigned quietly weeks earlier. Everyone who had signed something was being asked to explain why. The night before my deposition, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because the weight of it finally settled in. Karen's shortcuts hadn't just been bureaucratic tricks. They'd altered records that determined how emergency services responded, how taxes were assessed, how land was valued. Those systems don't forgive negligence. The deposition itself was straightforward. Calm questions. Clear answers. Date. Emails. Timelines. When it ended, the county attorney thanked me for my cooperation and told me something that stuck. People who manipulate systems usually believe they're invisible. They forget systems exist to protect the people they ignore. As I walked out, I passed Karen in the hallway again. This time, she was flanked by legal counsel. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, like acknowledging me would make everything real. But it was already real. The chapter closed with a notice posted on the HOA website. It announced that the association's authority was suspended pending further action. Residents were instructed to direct all questions to the county. Karen's name was nowhere on the page. For the first time since I'd moved in, the neighborhood felt quiet again. Not peaceful. Just waiting. And whatever came next was no longer in Karen's control. It didn't end with sirens or headlines. It ended with envelopes. Thick ones. Official ones. The kind people don't open standing up. Residents started receiving notices from the county and state within the same week. Clarifications. Corrections. Requests for information. Some letters were routine. Others were not. Everyone knew the difference as soon as they saw the return address. Karen received hers first. I didn't know that at the time. I only found out later, when her lawyer showed up at my door asking if I'd be willing to accept service of a subpoena addendum. He was polite, precise, and clearly exhausted. He explained that Karen's residence was temporarily inaccessible due to logistical issues. Logistical issues, it turned out, meant the county had posted a notice on her door. The subpoenas followed. Financial records, HOA communications, personal devices used for filings, email accounts, cloud storage, anything that touched the paperwork. Karen's shortcuts had created a digital trail so wide it was impossible to walk around. The state got involved next. Not just the HOA Oversight Office, but the licensing division that reviewed municipal filing agent. Karen's name appeared again, not as president, but as an individual who had repeatedly submitted official documents without authority. That distinction came up a lot. I received my own notice. Not a subpoena. A request to testify as a material witness if the case moved forward. It was oddly calming. There was no ambiguity left. The system had decided what mattered. Karen tried to spin it publicly. She issued a statement through her attorney claiming she was being unfairly targeted for innovative administrative practices. She framed the audit as overreach. She insisted no harm had occurred. The fire marshal's report contradicted that. So did the emergency services logs. Calls that had been misrouted. Response times that had been delayed. Not catastrophically. Not yet. But close enough to make everyone uncomfortable. The county didn't respond to her statement. They didn't have to. The next HOA newsletter never went out. The website stopped updating. The shared email address bounced messages back. Whatever structure Karen had leaned on for authority had collapsed inward. Neighbors started asking me what was going to happen next. I told them the same thing every time. I didn't know. And I didn't pretend to. Then the news showed up. Not cameras. Reporters. One local outlet ran a short piece about a suspended HOA under investigation for filing irregularities. They didn't name Karen. They didn't need to. Anyone in the neighborhood recognized the story immediately. Karen recognized it too. She confronted me in the grocery store parking lot. No witnesses she could intimidate. No paperwork she could wave around. Just two people standing between shopping carts. She accused me of enjoying this. She said I'd ruined her reputation. She said I'd turned a misunderstanding into a spectacle. I told her the spectacle had been built long before I noticed it. She asked if I was going to testify. I said yes. She laughed, sharp and brittle. She said people like me always thought systems would protect them. She said the county would get bored. She said this would all blow over. Her phone rang while she was talking. She answered it, listened, and her face drained of color. She hung up without saying goodbye. The formal charges were filed the following week. Not criminal yet. Civil enforcement actions. Penalties. Disqualifications. Orders to cease and desist from filing any municipal document. Karen was barred from serving in any HOA leadership role pending resolution. It wasn't the end. But it was the door closing behind her. The county announced corrective actions for the neighborhood. Address reassignment. Record repairs. Oversight for future filings. A temporary administrator appointed to manage HOA functions. For the first time, the HOA wasn't run by someone who thought rules were optional. Karen's name vanished from everything. Not erased. Archived. Tagged. Preserved in databases designed for accountability, not memory. I received confirmation that my address had been fully restored. No flags. No attachments. No phantom unit numbers lurking in systems that didn't forget. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of something unfinished. Because Karen hadn't accepted what was happening. And people who don't accept consequences don't go quietly. As Chapter 6 closed, one truth became impossible to ignore. The county had done its job. Now it was time for karma to do hers. She made it personal. It started small. A rumor floated through the neighborhood that I had financial ties to a competing developer. Someone claimed I'd reported the HOA to increase my own property value. Another whispered that I'd exaggerated safety concerns to scare the county into shutting things down. None of it was convincing, but that wasn't the point. The point was noise. Karen had always believed that if she talked long enough, reality would get tired and move on. She filed a complaint against me with the HOA's temporary administrator, accusing me of harassment. When that went nowhere, she filed a civil notice claiming I had interfered with contractual relationship. It was thin, desperate, dismissed quietly within days. Then she escalated. One morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my door stating that my property was scheduled for a compliance inspection. No county seal. No administrator signature. Just Karen's old formatting, recycled and sloppy. She hadn't filed it anywhere. She just wanted me rattled. I sent a photo to the county. They replied within an hour. "Thank you. Please preserve this." Karen was unraveling and systems notice unraveling. The temporary HOA administrator called a community meeting. Not mandatory. Just informational. But nearly everyone showed up. People wanted answers. They wanted closure. They wanted to know how someone had gotten away with so much for so long. Karen arrived late. She didn't sit. She stood near the back, arms crossed, scanning faces like she was still counting allies. There weren't many left. When the administrator explained the findings, Karen interrupted. She accused the county of targeting her. She accused neighbors of betrayal. She accused me of manipulation. No one interrupted her. That silence hurt more than any argument. When she finished, the administrator calmly explained that Karen was no longer authorized to speak on behalf of the HOA. He reminded her that she was subject to ongoing enforcement actions. He asked her to refrain from further disruptions. Karen laughed. It wasn't confident. It wasn't amused. It was the laugh of someone who couldn't accept that the room had moved on without her. She left halfway through the meeting, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. No one followed. The county scheduled the final hearing date soon after. Not public. Not dramatic. Just the last step before determinations became permanent. I was listed as a witness again. So was Karen. Neighbors started avoiding her. Not out of cruelty. Out of exhaustion. Every interaction with her carried risk. Drama. Accusations. Legal entanglement. People stopped answering her messages. Stopped returning her calls. Control without consent turns into isolation. Karen tried one last maneuver. She filed a last-minute appeal claiming procedural bias. It was rejected within 48 hours. The language was firm. Final. The night before the hearing, she came to my house again. This time, she didn't knock. She stood at the end of the driveway, shouting that I'd ruined her life. That I'd stolen her purpose. That the neighborhood would regret siding with me. Her voice echoed down the street, sharp and uncontained. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. 2 neighbors stepped outside. Someone called the administrator. Another called the county's non-emergency line. Karen noticed the phones. She stopped yelling. She stood there, breathing hard, like she'd run out of words before she'd run out of anger. She left before anyone arrived. The hearing itself was quiet. Clinical. Karen tried to argue intent. The county focused on impact. Charts. Timelines. Cross-referenced filings. Emergency routing maps that never should have existed. When it was my turn, I told the truth. Simply. Without embellishment. I described the knock on my door. The inspector's tablet. Karen's confidence. The safety report. Karen stared at the table. When it ended, the panel recessed. They didn't deliberate long. The decision was issued in writing. Violations confirmed. Authority revoked. Permanent disqualification from HOA leadership. Financial penalties assessed. Mandatory referral maintained. Karen wasn't arrested. Not yet. But she was finished. As I walked out of the building, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Not triumph. Not relief. Finality. Karen walked past me in the parking lot. No words. No insults. Just a look that flickered between rage and disbelief. For the first time, she understood. The systems she'd manipulated hadn't just noticed her. They had remembered. And Chapter 7 ended with something Karen had never planned for. Consequences that didn't care how loud she was. Or who she thought she owned. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. The county issued its final determination in plain language. No legal gymnastics, no soft phrasing. The findings confirmed what everyone already knew. Addresses had been misused. Records had been falsified. Safety protocols had been bypassed. Authority had been abused. Karen's name appeared exactly where it belonged. Attached to decisions. Attached to signatures. Attached to responsibility. The penalties were announced quietly. Fines large enough to hurt, but not headline-grabbing. A permanent ban from HOA leadership within the county. Mandatory compliance training if she ever attempted to work in any administrative role again. Continued referral to state regulators for review. She had built her power on control. The system dismantled it with documentation. The HOA was officially restructured. A professional management firm took over. Every record was refiled correctly. New addresses were created where they belonged. Emergency services confirmed access route. Utilities were re-verified. The invisible infrastructure Karen had taken for granted was repaired methodically. My address was restored to what it had always been. One house, one mailbox, one reality. Neighbors adjusted in small ways. Some apologized for doubting me early on. Others just nodded more when we passed. A few still believed Karen had meant well. I didn't argue. People need their own endings. Karen moved out 2 months later. No announcement. No goodbye. Her house went on the market quietly. The sign disappeared within weeks. I never saw her again. I did hear about her once more, indirectly. A friend forwarded a public notice from another county where Karen had applied for a position on a community board. The application had been denied. Not because of the story everyone told. Because of the records everyone could see. That was the real karma. Not embarrassment. Not public shaming. Just a permanent footprint in systems she'd assumed were blind. Life returned to its ordinary rhythms. Trash days. Weather complaints. Holiday lights that stayed up too long. The kind of normal that feels earned after chaos. Sometimes I still think about the inspector at my door, holding up his tablet, asking about homes that didn't exist. About how close this came to being ignored. About how easily convenience turns into risk when no one says no. Karen thought she could borrow my address. She didn't realize she was borrowing accountability. And when the county audit blew everything open, it didn't just expose a scheme. It reminded an entire neighborhood that power without permission always leaves a paper trail. And paper, unlike people, never forgets.